Órale, bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFB podcast. I'm your host, Jorge Martin, and we've got a treat for you today. We're back to the Midwest, Wisconsin, in fact, on Wisconsin. And our invitado is the muy estimado Pat Fitzmaurice. He writes for thefootballgirl.com and is the host of the really cool Fitz on Fantasy podcast, where he has some of the greatest minds in the fantasy industry and outside of that industry. They chop it up with him, and it's just so entertaining. And since his Midwestern manners won't allow us to toot his own horn, I'm going to point it out for him that he was el numero uno in 2020. He was the number one ranker in Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings. He's one of the best. He's just one of the nicest people I've met, and I'm so happy that he accepted my invite. Pat, muchas gracias for joining us. Please make yourself at home. Estás en su casa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, hola, Jorge. So nice to meet you. Very flattering introduction. Thank you very much. Truth be told, I'm actually not in Wisconsin. I'm behind enemy lines living in Illinois. But right. I am a Wisconsin boy at heart. I'm only less than an hour from the state line, so still pretty close. But I've got to deal with some Bears fans and Cubs fans, unfortunately. Into every life, a little rain must fall. But I've had the upper hand for a while, so that's okay.
Well, I know you haven't had to hear from Bulls fans because, this was a pretty good year for the Milwaukee Bucks. And I mean, what a year for, Milwaukee sports. You've got the Brewers way out ahead in the NL Central. You've got the return of Aaron Rodgers and running it up one more time in the Super Bowl run. And obviously the Wisconsin Badgers are number 12 in AP. Can you kind of sum up, what this year has been like for just for Milwaukee and Wisconsin sports in general?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, the Packers have had a pretty good nearly 30-year run with Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. Probably should have won more than 2 titles in that stretch, but at least they're in there just about every year. So like no complaints about being a Packer fan during that span. And the Badgers have been pretty good for the last 25 years and have even made some noise in basketball, but really kind of rare to have the Milwaukee teams kicking in. The Bucks and Brewers were both good for a while in the 80s. When I was a kid, there was a heyday in like the early to mid 80s when they were both good. But since then, some pretty lean years, and like one championship is amazing. Just the possibility that the Brewers are looking like they're going to take this division here, going up, I believe, 9 games last night with their win against the Giants. Just too much to contemplate, the possibility of 2 Milwaukee championships in one year after not winning one since 1971. So that would just be completely overwhelming for me, I think. And I'm representing the Brewers here. So the Brewers have been my team for so long, man. It would be awesome for them to break through and make a World Series.
Well, I know we communicated a little bit. I sent over a note about how Joey Votto was saying that this is the best pitching staff he's seen probably since the Doc Halladay and Cliff Lee Phillies in around 2010. I will say I need to thank the Brewers for having me in first place in my NL only fantasy baseball league, because I got Brandon Woodruff, Christian Yelich, local boy for us here in LA. Eduardo Escobar, Willie Adames, great free agent pickup for me, and Luis Urias, and also the couple of guys in the bullpen, so I really should thank you. And I actually should have had my Gorman Thomas bobblehead out here to show you.
Oh man, yes, you won my heart, Jorge, bringing up Storm and Gorman. So, but yeah, I mean, they have been like, I always knew the pitching was going to be good this year. The front line of the rotation with Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff and Freddie Peralta is just amazing, and gives them a great shot in any short series. In the back end with Josh Hader and Devin Williams is great, and then they can really kind of mix and match to bridge the gap. But At the beginning of the season, that offense was just not looking like it was playoff caliber with, Yelich hurt and Keston Hiura sort of disappointing. But what they've been able to do and add with, as you mentioned, Willy Adames and Eduardo Escobar and this Colton Wong came back from an injury. Like, this lineup is looking much more formidable after being really just not very imposing at all early in the season. So it's an at least average playoff caliber lineup, but pair it with the pitching. And, I happen to think Craig Counsell is the best manager in baseball. I'm a little biased. We come from the same little village in just north of Milwaukee, but I'm excited about the playoff run ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you. Counsell is a stud. I mean, it seems like always he has everything working out perfectly, and even when he has to run those bullpen games, it just seems like every string is pulled exactly right. Just every pitching move is made. Oh, it's fantastic. But we are a fantasy football podcast, so let's shift gears a little bit into there. We both kind of shared offline that we both started playing fantasy football in 1990, back in the keeping stats in the newspaper days and everything like that. And you were one of the early adopters to start creating fantasy content, writing for Pro Football Weekly. As I said, I read your stuff back then. How out of this world is what's happening today in fantasy football content creation? How much otherworldly was it when you think back to those first days of writing for a print publication?
Yeah, it really is crazy, Jorge, how far fantasy sports have come and become this multi-billion-dollar industry. When at the time, maybe 20% of my job at Pro Football Weekly when I was hired was fantasy. I mean, they kind of had a lead fantasy guy, and I would help with the preseason magazine back when everyone got a preseason magazine, at least one, to go into their drafts with. And we were starting to bolster our online fantasy content, but really I was doing more general NFL coverage. But then when I left fantasy or Pro Football Weekly after a few years, I left on good terms, and they asked me to, if I wanted to continue doing stuff on a freelance basis. And I said yes. And that continued until, they eventually folded. But then, I've been doing stuff for other people, and it's just kind of been this long thing. But yes, back to what you were mentioning, in the late 90s, I mean, there were just so few people making a career of it, and now, hundreds of people working full time in this as a job. And like, I remember, I don't know, maybe in 98 or 99 doing some, so-called experts league. Someone rounded up 12 people who wrote about fantasy and did one of those. And I just thought, like, it was just such a interesting, novel kind of idea at the time. And now it's like, there are a zillion of these expert leagues starting in, drafts in February and March. So they can, everyone can sort of see how the so-called experts are drafting. And it's amazing how long it's come. And it just shows that how much people love this game. It used to be people would play in one league. Now one is never enough for anyone. I mean, my 14-year-old son is up to 4 leagues this year. He's a little degenerate, just following in dad's footsteps. So unreal how this industry has just exploded over the last 20 years or so.
And by the way, speaking of experts leagues, your producer of the Fitz on Fantasy podcast, Colm Kelly, he and I are in the same division in the Scott Fish Bowl. So
I saw that
division.
Amazing. Yeah, Colm is a great guy. I mean, if you play in the U2 division, you have to have an Irishman in your division with you, right? It's only fitting.
We have two of them actually. So
Nice.
when we got all paired up, everybody started sharing U2 stories and pictures, and yeah, it was just it was phenomenal to be this. And my wife being my wife being of Irish descent, her first name is Shannon, so I don't think you could get much more Irish than that. So I felt like that kind of gave me a little entree in there, so punched my ticket in there. So we talked one of the things that I love that we're doing this now, because I saw a recent poll that 56% of all fantasy drafts are happening from August 30th up until the September 9th kickoff. So, I mean, we're talking more than half, and I love the opportunity to be able to pick your brain and talk strategy and kind of throw around some ideas of things that you've seen that work that you use in your own. But you know, we're I want to be able to help our Familia community that are still getting ready for drafts. What are some of your favorites? Do you have a favorite strategy that you like to do? Heavy RB, aka zero wide receiver, zero RB, hero RB, any other any way you would like to cut it up?
Yeah, it seems like, I've started a couple drafts with two running backs, but for the most part, it's sort of been that hero RB or anchor RB or whatever it's been called, where you kind of take one guy, usually in the first, maybe in the second, and then just start stacking wide receivers around them. Like, particularly if it's a PPR, half PPR league, and there are three starting wide receiver spots, like, I want to be stronger at wide receiver than my opponents. Like, that's kind of I want to overwhelm people with firepower at wide receiver. And, hopefully, like, you might be able to appreciate this, Jorge, because I think, you have a fantasy baseball background. We've talked about this. I kind of compare it, if you play fantasy baseball, to me, wide receivers are more like hitters and running backs are more like pitchers. Like, with hitting, sort of talent is talent, and there are going to be some fluctuations in production. But for the most part, you largely get what you pay for. Whereas I think with pitchers and running backs, it can be a little more situational. The guy who had a 2.78 ERA last year all of a sudden blows up and has a 5 ERA the following year, and no one can figure out why. Maybe there was forearm tightness we didn't know about. Who knows? But I feel like it's the same way at running back, where guys come out of the fog every year. I mean, there are guys who we're not talking about at all, who are going to be causing a massive stampede on the waiver wire in week 5, a month from now. And like, that just kind of happens. And I feel like you kind of have to give yourself a chance to get lucky at running back a little. It's great to have that one anchor guy, but then I don't mind sort of taking shots and like, not having a real established guy at that second spot and playing waivers. And, I'm okay going in with like a guy who has kind of an ambiguous role. Like, even if I have to start a Melvin Gordon at my running back 2 spot, as long as I'm destroying people at wide receiver, I'm okay with that. And by stocking up on wide receivers, 4 of them in the first 5 rounds or so, like, you're kind of winning that race to the flex spot too. And there's a good chance that, if you can put a good fourth, like a Tyler Boyd or a, Chase Claypool as your 4th receiver, like, that's a big plus. I love Claypool. I don't really want him as like my 2nd receiver though. I want him as my 3rd or 4th. And that way, I know I'm outgunning my opponents a receiver every week.
No, I feel good. Claypool is one of my breakout candidates this year. I really think I think the targets are going to go up a little bit more. I still think Deontay Johnson's going to be the main guy when it comes to targets, but I think Claypool has that nose for the end zone that I don't know if the other guys did, and I think that's going to be the difference to make him more.
Yeah.
I don't know if he gets the DK Metcalf level from last year, but I mean, it's the only comp I have for him.
And it's a good one because he is just such a physical mismatch for basically everyone he's going to go against this season. So, I mean, you have to like that. Like, he is just a physical freak.
Now, with just, it just seems like there's more, because this year we had exhibition games, and last year we didn't. So we didn't have so many season-ending injuries. But this year, you've got the Cam Akers injury that happened right before training camp, and the Travis Etienne, and then obviously over the weekend the J.K. Dobbins injury. I started to kind of get a little bit more nervous about playing anchor RB and kind of wanting to get solidify, and I think part of it comes into like where I'm drafting in the first round is do I think that the cliff's going to happen much more quickly by the time the third round comes around? Do you take that into account?
Yeah, to some extent. Like the cliff does come earlier. We've seen 3 probably of the top 25 running backs go down. Akers, who was a consensus top 10 guy, Dobbins, a consensus top 20 guy, and then ETN was probably around the fringes of everyone's top 25. So yeah, it's thinned the herd somewhat, and people might see that as a more compelling reason to start off running back. But then you could also make the case like, well, we've seen these guys go down already. Like running back is the injury rate at that position. It's risky. You're investing a lot in a position with a high degree of risk and, a high degree of sort of fluctuation in performance. So, I guess that's one of the reasons I tend to lean towards the build at wide receiver philosophy, and hopefully I'm the guy holding Gus Edwards when, he lucks into a big role or whatever. You hate to cash in on injuries and, take victory laps over having James Robinson on your roster after Travis Etienne goes down. But, like these partial guys who could stand to gain considerably from an injury can be pretty valuable. If anything happened, no one's into drafting Melvin Gordon right now, but if something happened to Javonte Williams, suddenly Melvin Gordon would be a tremendously valuable asset. So I don't mind stocking up on multiple running backs who have that sort of partial workload profile where they're, one of several guys contributing to a backfield, because you can never know what happens, what could happen, and their role might evolve into something a lot bigger than than it appears to be now.
Yeah, a couple of examples were like J.K. Dobbins and DeAndre Swift last year, that they just all of a sudden they started to get targets and touches in the teens, and they became valuable that way. So totally agree with you on that one. I wanted to ask, with the rise of Superflex leagues so much in the fantasy industry, how do you approach when to grab a quarterback in the Superflex leagues? I hear so much different opinion on when people like to grab them.
Yeah, so I tend to, I think I've evolved here a little bit. I used to be almost stubborn about getting my quarterbacks and really kind of building at the other positions. And I maybe learned a lesson there last year when I did that, and I wound up with like Kirk Cousins and Sam Darnold as my 2 quarterbacks. Now the rest of my team, the running backs and wide receivers were really good and really deep. But I was getting hammered at quarterback every week by 20 points, 30 points, and losing games by 3 points after running that big quarterback deficit. So I'm like, maybe I should rethink this a little bit. Now I'm kind of willing to wait at one spot, but I do like to get sort of an anchor guy early on. I think the gap between Christian McCaffrey and other running backs is so great that if you've got the number 1 overall in a super flex, I think he is the right pick. But for pretty much any of the next 5 or 6 picks, I think I would go with, one of those big guns at quarterback: Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson. If you're sitting at 12 and you miss out, and being at 12 is tricky because you're on the end and there are going to be 24 picks made between picks for you. You might not be in a great spot to snag the quarterback you want. There might be a tier that sort of runs out right as it's coming to you. So it's trickier to fill that spot there. But I definitely want to try to get like one of the top 12 guys at least, if not one of those elite guys, at least like a Ryan Tannehill or Jalen Hurts. But I'm willing to wait a little bit. Like in the Scott Fish Bowl, I was lucky enough to get the 102 pick. McCaffrey did go 1, so I got Mahomes. But then I waited around, and I think I got Tua in like the 7th round or the 6th round. Got Teddy Bridgewater a little later. So I don't mind being patient with the second spot, but I've learned that trying to do quarterback and the cheap in both spots can be a little bit too risky.
How about in single quarterback leagues? Where do you see yourself thinking, okay, I got to grab a quarterback at this point? And is grabbing one of those Konami code quarterbacks a priority for you?
Yeah. You just hit the nail on the head with the Konami code mention, Jorge, and I'm sure you familiarized your fans with that term. And I think it's getting even more important to have a mobile quarterback. We're going to have, even if not all the rookies are starting in week 1, by early October, we're going to have 5 rookies starting. And really, Mac Jones is probably the only one who's not considered a mobile quarterback. Lance is an explosive runner. Fields is an explosive runner. Lawrence and Wilson add value with their legs. They're going to score rushing touchdowns and, help out in that category. So add that to, the Kyler Murrays, the Lamar Jacksons, Ryan Tannehill, even these guys who are running quarterbacks. Yeah, that's really important. You just can't be content anymore to wait and get a Matt Ryan and feel confident you're going to get a finish in the quarterback 7 to quarterback 13 range. Matt Ryan could have everything go right for him this year, like have his touchdown variance break right and throw for 4,500 yards and still finish as the quarterback 14 because he adds absolutely nothing in the running game. So I've become a little more willing to be aggressive, especially in some of these expert drafts where I think the wait on quarterback philosophy has carried over. Like now I kind of think that's a less viable strategy than it used to be. And I'm aggressively going after Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray in the 4th or 5th round. And I'm probably going to play it the same way. Like I don't mind waiting and having, Ryan Tannehill or Trevor Lawrence be my firewall. But, I'm not afraid to go for an early quarterback. Whereas a couple of years ago, I was pretty much always waiting.
No, it's I agree with you. It's one of the guys that I really want to target. You mentioned Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray's another one. I look at those guys; they're just such difference makers at that position. So I find that it's not a bad idea to just kind of follow suit. And one of the things that I noticed last year, the ADP started to catch up with that. We were not finding Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes in the double digit rounds.
Right.
Kyler Murray, you had to pay up for him in the 5th or 6th last year. So I'd gladly do that this year.
Yeah.
How about the elite, early tight end? That's becoming a thing this year. Where do you stand on when to grab one of those guys?
It just so happened I've probably done more shopping at the dollar store for my tight ends this year, just because the price has been like, there's not a guy I love at any price. Travis Kelce, I don't like the way my team builds look when I go tight end in the 1st round. So I usually am not drafting Travis Kelce. I think Darren Waller might be a little overpriced and sort of being drafted at his ceiling in the early to mid 2nd round. I think Kittle is pretty reasonably priced. That's one guy, if I can get him around that 2-3 turn, I might be willing to. And I like Kittle as much or more than Waller. That might be a minority opinion, but
I'm with you.
Yeah, he's been really super efficient. 10 yards a target for him over the last 3 years. And really in the 2 years that Darren Waller has been a thing, he's averaged like basically 9 targets a game. Kittle not far behind at like 8.3, but I think while Waller has averaged like, eight something yards per target, 8.6 or something, Kittle's averaged 10, and he's just the hardest guy to tackle in the league other than Derrick Henry. Do we really trust Derek Carr as a target delivery mechanism more than Trey Lance, who's one of the best quarterback prospects to come out of the college ranks in a few years? I think Kittle's a little bit better value, and that's one buying opportunity there. But like Kyle Pitts is interesting, this unicorn prospect, but like he's been priced at a premium throughout the process. He's pretty much got to be a freak of nature to turn a profit for you. And TJ Hawkinson and Mark Andrews are fairly expensive, like 5th round picks, I would say, in most 12-team leagues. So it's kind of hard to get one of those guys. And that's part of the reason I've been pivoting to the higher end quarterbacks. I think they're almost easy to acquire at a price I like and I'm willing to pay. And that 5th round is really kind of a key round, Jorge. Like there's still good receivers there. You're sort of fishing if you're going running back there with the Mike Davises, a guy who's a career backup but is being projected for heavy volume. They're the last of the productive tight ends with like Andrews and Hawkinson, and there's still premium quarterbacks available like Dak and Murray. So there are a lot of ways to go there. And I've been finding myself going, either layering on another wide receiver or taking that quarterback instead of the tight end. And one recommendation I would make to anyone, if you play in a 12-team league, if you're going to get a really top tight end, fine. If you're going to get a really top quarterback, fine. But don't get the top shelf brand at both of those positions, because you're just not going to have enough at running back and wide receiver. And that's where you need volume. There are going to be buys. There are going to be injuries. You need to stock those cupboards. And if you go elite tight end and elite quarterback, you're just not going to have enough at the all-important running back and wide receiver positions.
Oh, outstanding. Outstanding. I've been kind of starting to preach that a lot more myself. One thing that you mentioned, Kittle over Waller, what put me over the top, and I know fantasy analysts say don't look at the playoff schedules and everything, but I always get those the playoff schedules, and I figure out where people are. And to me, I looked at week 17. The 49ers are hosting the Houston Texans, and I've told people, I said, look, yes, you don't know what teams are going to be like. We know the Texans are not going to be good. They're going into it not going to be good defensively. So I'm taking my chances. I think it's going to be a bloodbath, and I could see Kittle going for 140 yards, 10 targets, 10 receptions, and a couple of touchdowns, and help you win the championship. So that's for you, Familia, right there. So when it comes to so we've talked a little bit about different parts of the strategy. When you're going into rounds 1 to 4, these are crucial rounds for fantasy drafts. What are your goals in those rounds?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, generally I'm probably almost always going 1 running back and 3 receivers. Like I want to start to build the core of my receiving group and get those 3 starters there. I think there's kind of a misconception that wide receiver is a deep position. And, it is, in that you can look at it and say, hey, Jarvis Landry is a pretty good wide receiver. And he's like, his ADP is 40 or 41 or whatever. But I also don't think you want Jarvis Landry as your number 2 wide receiver. I think you're going to be at a disadvantage if you've got Jarvis Landry and your opponent's number 2 receiver is Chris Godwin or Mike Evans or Robert Woods. So like it's deep to a certain point, but I think you have to keep pace with your league mates in that area. Get yourself one of the top 12 at least. Get yourself 2 of the top 25 at least. Don't fall behind pace at wide receiver. You're going to maybe discover it's not quite as deep as you think.
Yeah, those guys after a while they start to become volatile. The boom bust guys. How about rounds 5 to 10, which can I think they can sometimes win somebody's league at that point when you get those sleepers. The Stephon Diggs went in this range.
Yes.
Josh Allen went in this range last year. What are you looking to accomplish there?
Yeah, very important range. I mean, as we mentioned, like the dilemmas and the options you have in the fifth round. Like I think that's such a key round for people. And so usually since I'm going running back, wide receiver early, like this is the range where I'm finding my first quarterback and my first tight end. Um, and I'm pretty much coming away like I want to have like 5 or 6 wide receivers, I think, by the end of the 10th round. So I'm continuing to build there. And, I'm probably not doing too many of the later round wide receivers. I'd rather just get those 5 or 6 guys I really trust, get them early in the first 10 rounds or so. And then I'm also like fishing the pond at running back in that area. And with one of those guys we talked about earlier with the ambiguous usage group, the guys who have the partial role, but who knows, depending on how things break, could become pretty valuable properties as the season goes on.
So round 11, that's where 11 till the end. That's where people are getting their sleepers. They're those guys that the high upside guys, maybe the rookies in that point. Who are the players you're looking to snag in that range?
Yeah, so boy, he's not going in the round like the early double-digit rounds anymore. He's starting to creep up, at least in the analyst leagues I've played in. But I think in most home leagues, you can probably get Rondale Moore in like the 11th or 12th rounds. And just being here in the Midwest and watching Big Ten football, like Purdue football had not been appointment viewing since Drew Brees was playing in the 90s until Rondale Moore's freshman season in 2018, where he, scored 18 touchdowns and had like 1,800 combined yards and pretty much beat Ohio State single-handedly in that game. This guy's just dynamic, and I think he fits what Cliff Kingsbury's offense is perfectly. Like people give Cliff a lot of grief for having this horizontal passing game, but like those horizontal routes were going to Larry Fitzgerald before, and Larry Fitzgerald is running like an offensive lineman 40 time by this point. And Rondale Moore is just, so explosive, like this sub 4.4 guy, and not a frail little dude either. I think this guy squats like 600 pounds. Like this guy is just an incredible little weapon, just a total firecracker. And I think the Kingsbury offense is going to really suit him. I'm excited about what he can do. And I do like to fish for those running backs who, I guess you could call them the handcuff backs, but I don't want to handcuff my own guys. I want, the guys playing behind other people's backs. Ramondre Stevenson has been a big favorite of mine. And the cat's pretty much out of the bag there with him scoring 5 touchdowns in 3 preseason games, I think. But a big dude who can also catch passes and has pretty quick feet. He could be sort of the Patriots' new LeGarrette Blount, but if Blount could actually catch passes, that seems like a pretty valuable property. Guys like Salvon Ahmed, who flashed a little bit in Miami last year and is part of a very vague backfield right now, but I think he's going to have a role all season, and maybe he's just an injury away from a really significant role. So good time in those rounds to fish for the backup running backs. Where you're looking more at talent than situation, and, maybe just hope kind of the situation breaks right and your guy gets a chance to shine.
Yeah, you mentioned Ramondre Stevenson. I remember during in the lead up to the draft, I was looking at some some highlights of him, some cut ups. I don't want to say I was watching film on him to sound so technical, but I remember watching him and feeling like, and similar age, so we remember the Oklahoma days in the 80s. Marcus Dupree. I remember he immediately reminded me, and then like literally like when I had that thought about 10 seconds later, the announcer talks about, oh, he that's reminiscent of Marcus Dupree back in the late 80s. I just thought,
I mean,
the confirmation.
That is quite a comp, because Marcus Dupree, I mean, it never really happened for him in the NFL, but man, was that guy a college player.
Oh, just beautiful college player. Beautiful college player. So we talked about players to target. Who are maybe some players that you're fading in this year?
All right. So, Mike Davis is a guy who usually is in that 5th round range. I mentioned him, and I would rather take a talented dude. And it didn't work out with Travis Etienne, but to me, I would always draft a Travis Etienne ahead of a Mike Davis, a guy who's a really exciting prospect, but has an ambiguous role, versus a guy who's got the role, but is this 27 or 28-year-old career backup. Just like having sort of an unwavering faith that Mike Davis is going to hold on to that workhorse role all year. Just kind of not the way I want to play. As we talked about, give yourself a chance to get lucky at running back, because things are always evolving in unexpected ways. And I'd be, pretty surprised, quite frankly, if we saw like a 270 carry season for Mike Davis this year, but people seem to be counting on that. I guess I'm fading Adam Thielen a little bit. A guy in the fantasy space, Ben Gretsch, has made the point that targets are earned, and target totals and target rates are pretty important, because you're earning the trust of your quarterback to throw you the ball. And from 2017 to 2018, I think Adam Thielen was averaging like 9 or 9.3 targets per game or something like that. But over the last 2 years, it's been like 6.3 targets per game. And maybe injuries have had something to do with that. And Justin Jefferson's arrival certainly had something to do with that last year. But Jefferson is the guy now. I mean, he's pretty special. And, people are still pretty confidently taking Thielen as like a top 20 to 25 wide receiver. And to me, if he's inside the top 25, it's not by much. I'm just, there's always someone in every draft who likes him a little bit more than me. And I'll give you one last guy. I think people are pretty supremely confident from what I've seen in drafts that Justin Herbert's next step is automatically going to be a step forward. And I mean, he's exciting and I like him, and I actually have him in 2 dynasty leagues, and I want this guy to succeed really badly, but maybe people aren't quite building in the possibility of a sophomore slump, especially for a guy who's got to process a whole new offense now. Yes, they've improved the offensive line, and Herbert was really exciting, threw a lot of touchdown passes, put up some really nice raw numbers. But if you look a little closer, like his yards per attempt, which, not a perfect stat, but a pretty good back of the napkin indicator of a quarterback's ability, it was just sort of average. His passer rating was just sort of like average for an NFL starter. I just don't know if he's going to make quite the leap that people are expecting. When I see him being drafted ahead of Russell Wilson, I'm just not on board with it. And he's been kind of an easy fade for me just because the price has been too expensive.
Yeah, he is in that range. I think in the Scott Fishbowl, I think I took him. I think Russell Wilson went right before him, and so I snapped him up. We had 10 quarterbacks go in the first round. So Herbert, the new offense is the one thing that really gives me pause with that. Everything else, I kind of see that step up going forward, but and then Joe Lombardi things did not go well between him and Matthew Stafford, hoping that he maybe learned the lesson and improved. And I know especially in LA and the Chargers themselves are really they're banking a lot on this guy, and I think he's
exciting for sure. It's not that I think he's bad. Like, he's an exciting guy. Like, his arm is phenomenal. It's something like if you watch him at Oregon, I don't think people really thought he was going to come in and make that sort of impact as a passer right away. And then he adds value with his legs too. Another guy like, maybe in that Trevor Lawrence class where he's not strictly a runner. Like, you don't see him as a running quarterback, but he will run aggressively, and he's pretty mobile. I mean, he killed my Wisconsin Badgers with his legs in the Rose Bowl in his last college game. So like I'm not down on him by any means, but he's definitely gotten pretty expensive in drafts.
Yeah, that's the thing. And it's exactly, it's just where he's being drafted. And I couldn't, I'm still on the plus side that I think he's going to take the next step, but I definitely see the warning signs, and the other guys that you mentioned, I'm totally with you on that one. Any, you mentioned a few breakout players, any breakout players that you haven't mentioned that you want to call out?
Let's see. I mean, like, AJ Dillon is in a pretty good spot this year. I like Aaron Jones a lot, but it's interesting that we're going to get to see Dillon in this expanded role. And I mean, just another guy who's like super physically imposing. Really only one game where he got a lot of run last year, but it was a pretty memorable one, a snow game against the Tennessee Titans. And, maybe in fairness, it looked like the Titans almost didn't want to be there that night. So maybe Dillon's job was a little easier, but man, he was just a monster in that game. So it'll be fun to see Quadzilla get his first opportunity. And, like Trey Sermon is another guy I think we should mention. I think people like Raheem Mostert, and understandably, even though a guy who didn't have much college pedigree, he just has fit that Shanahan offense really well. But, it seems like he can't physically hold up to a big load. So I think that's why they moved aggressively to trade up to get Sermon. And, I've been saying this on some other podcasts. It's just, we've seen that Shanahan system work so well through the years. Mike Shanahan, some of the guys that he turned into guys who were like these fantasy marvels, or at least 1-year wonders, guys like Ruben Drones and Tatum Bell, and Alfred Morris had that big year with Washington. And these guys were pretty ordinary talents who had these big years. And then when the Shanahans got their hands on like a really talented back like Clinton Portis or Terrell Davis, it was just magic. And, those guys were turning in some league-winning seasons. And what if Sermon is that kind of guy? I mean, it looks like he has that one-cut ability. Like, he's versatile. He's got the combination of power and speed. And my football guy's colleague, Matt Waldman, who studies college tape, like, he was Matt's number one prospect this year. And the thing that really resonated that Matt told me was like, there isn't a back in this class who can cut without change direction without losing speed like Trey Sermon. Like, he does that so much better than anyone else in this class. And like, that ability is so important in the Shanahan system, to be able to make those cuts, that one cut and go in that zone scheme. Like, you're paying a committee back price for him, and he's a committee back right now. But what happens if he winds up winning a Terrell Davis, Clinton Portis sized workload in that offense? Like, it's pretty exciting.
And all those guys, David Johnson, I mean, they took over the job in the second half of the season. So yeah, this is, I could totally see that happening. Last one on the football side. So you've had success on the ranking side. Do you any strategy that you might want to pass on to someone who's officially publishing rankings for the first time?
Yeah, sure. And this one, this one was a lesson I learned over the years from people smarter than me who do rankings and who have done really well. Like, sometimes I would see myself be an outlier on a certain guy, and maybe I had him ranked lower than other people, and they would wind up being proven right. And this guy someone would have a good game. And I think the tendency when you start ranking weekly with weekly rankings is to overplay the defensive matchups a little bit, and to put too much emphasis on that as opposed to just the volume outlook. I think volume is king. and defensive matchup is sort of the queen. Like, look for volume first and defensive matchup second. Like, I know people who just, they'll really dock people who are in seemingly tough matchups. But, if someone's guaranteed pretty much in their offense, a running back who's getting reliably 14 to 18 carries a week, or a wide receiver who's, a Deontay Johnson who gets double digit touches every time he goes out there. Like, don't dock those guys too hard just because they're going up against a shutdown corner or a really tough run defense. Like, more often than not, those guys they'll still get theirs despite the tough matchup.
Awesome. Pat, I mean, this has been so great. And so I kind of want to take this interview a little bit of a left turn, because I know, on your Fitz on Fantasy podcast, you don't just talk football. Obviously, there's great content there, but you've ventured into different things. And I know I've heard you, especially on the interview with Scott Pianowski, you talked about music. And so I've got a few bands. I know you're in the R.E.M. division in the Scott Fishbowl. As I mentioned, I'm in the U2 division. Shout out to Colm Kelly. Hello, Ireland. But I'm gonna throw out a band name, and I just want you to name a couple, one or two songs that are your favorites. And if you got a reason why, feel free to add. So let's start with Michael Stipe and R.E.M.
Oh, nice. So I guess I'll never love another R.E.M. album quite as much as I did their first one, Murmur. Like, that one just, I think I bought it based on a Rolling Stone review, and it was just kind of like one of my first forays into alternative music when I was like, still a teen. So Sitting Still from that album is always going to be a classic for me. And the whole, their follow-up Reckoning was great too, and South Central Rain and Don't Go Back to Rockville are always going to be on my short list of favorite R.E.M. tunes too. Boy, I could definitely run through their catalog and rattle off 40 songs easily that I'm in love with, but I should probably cut it off there.
All right. Well, this next one, I mean, the list could go to 250 songs really easily, but the Beatles.
Oh yeah. Man, that's hard. I'm tempted to say something like the only Beatles collection my mom had in her album collection was Rubber Soul, which was kind of my favorite. But I'm actually not going to take a Rubber Soul. Like, George Harrison did some of the very best songs for them, and like Something has always, the song Something has always just been like special for me. Whatever, just like, hearing that come on the radio, like, it's always just, something I'll never change the channel when that song comes on. It's like special song. Here Comes the Sun is another Harrison classic. So many directions you could go with this one. But yeah, I'll stick with Something, I guess.
In fact, I think Something and Here Comes the Sun were on a single. I believe they were the single. I think Here Comes the Sun was the B-side. So
that's amazing.
You think, yeah, Here Comes the Sun is always is for everyone. It's not only my favorite Beatles song, it's one of the five. It's one of my 5 Desert Island songs. So just love that one.
Both of those songs are just amazing. I mean, George Harrison was his contributions were vastly underrated for sure.
Yeah, R.I.P. Well. Also, R.I.P. to Charlie Watts. Recently, we lost him.
Yeah.
Let's do the Rolling Stones.
Oh, good Charlie Watts song is Sway. The Sticky Fingers album to me is just perfect. Beginning to end, it's just a perfect album. And Sway is a good Charlie Watts. Also good Mick Taylor song, but maybe my favorite, and Scott Pianowski's podcast partner, Michael Salfino, kind of ridiculed me for this one because it was sort of an 80s Rolling Stone song, but like just the vibe of this song, Waiting on a Friend. Like that one's just always kind of got me. And, a great Rolling Stone song with sax, like I'm totally in.
And and I think like that early 80s, Miss You, and even Start Me Up, which I think it is, I mean, that early 80s, I think that was still in their creative heyday. I love that. Oh God. And the late 60s stuff, Let It Bleed, that I went through like a Charlie Watts, a Rolling Stones day on the day that Charlie Watts passed away, and just kind of like, oh, this is kind of cool. Thank you Spotify for doing that.
Yeah.
Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band.
Yeah, so like I'm probably not as big a Bruce fan as the East Coast faction of my family for sure. Some friends from the East Coast. Like it seems like if you're from the East Coast, it's almost an obligation to love Bruce Springsteen. So I've always liked him more than I've loved him, but I would say probably my favorite of his is Hungry Heart. Like that, it always makes me think of the song "Risky Business," and which I think is just this vastly underrated classic. That comes up on that in that movie. But yeah, Bruce definitely has some bangers. I've never seen him in concert, which is a big regret because I know he just gives his all for 3+ hours every time he goes out there.
Yeah, you always get your money's worth. And Hungry Heart, when he plays that live, is really incredible. It's one of the great audience participation songs of all time. So just so can't 3.5 hours when a guy's over 70, it's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. Any other favorite band you want to call out?
Yeah, I mean, should we talk about U2? Since they've seen, like, I've been lucky enough to see them a few times, like on the Joshua Tree tour. Sometime after, I can't remember if it was after War or the Unforgettable Fire, they played on this Amnesty International tour with the Police and Peter Gabriel and Lou Reed. And when I saw them in Chicago, I think Robin Williams did an impromptu 30 minutes of stand-up comedy. It was just like pretty magical. So yeah, like, I mean, any of the old U2 really gets me. I'd say old as anything like Joshua Tree and earlier. Joshua Tree is another pretty perfect album. Like people don't think of albums and CDs in terms of sides anymore, but that beginning of side 2, I think it was, with like In God's Country, Trip Through Your Wires, Red Hill Mining Town, was just an amazing stretch of songs.
Yeah, and then right after that is One Tree Hill,
Tree Hill, yes.
Oh, just one of the incredibles. Yeah, for me, Where the Streets Have No Name is that whole album is incredible. But Where the Streets Have No Name, especially live, it just gets me in a way that's just incredible. And and them live is. It's they don't go 3.5 hours like Springsteen, but they're still just one of the great live acts. In fact, the first time I saw them was on the original Joshua Tree tour, and then to see them again in 2017 to reprise that and play the entire album was just in fact, our mutual friend Mauricio Gutierrez, we found out that we were at the same show at the Rose Bowl. We shared some stories on that one. It was just one I've seen them in the teens, something like 15 or 16 times, and still, as magical and as incredible those. And another one, another early song, Bad. From the Unforgettable Fire album, to hear that live is just you just sit back and you just let the music just kind of just go through you, and it's just
seeing them in the Rose Bowl must have been just a special experience. I can't even imagine how incredible that would have been.
Oh, and I've seen him twice in the Rose Bowl, and once was on a previous tour. I think it was like 2009 or 2010, and it's just phenomenal. I mean, and saw them on both ends, both before and after the 9/11. And it was a very similar song list, but it felt like a very different show. I still remember them showing all the names of the people who passed, and in the flights, and it just I cheered. I'm crying watching this happen. So, they're a special band, and thank you for indulging
of
this
course.
musical aficionado for a few minutes. And I always love to close these out because I'm pleasantly surprised at how much us being a Latino focused, and our as I mentioned, our genesis of the podcast was over a plate of tamales. And favorite, what are some of your favorite Mexican foods, and do you have favorite taco types?
Oh yeah. So for tacos, I mean, like steak is always the go-to, but there's um, I lived in the city of Chicago for a while, and there was everything from like there were great hole in the wall taco places to Rick Bayless's restaurants where it's like the upscale Mexican food. So like there was this great range, and out here in the suburbs where we've been for like the last 15 years or so, not quite as many great places, but there is a place near us that does an amazing El Pastor taco. Like it's just fantastic. They just like get everything. It's like simple. It's like pork, the onion, the cilantro. They just have the blend so well done. But I think I was lucky that growing up in Milwaukee, like Milwaukee, it's hard to get good pizza in Milwaukee, but Milwaukee has got more than its fair share of good Mexican restaurants and always has. And one of my favorites, and it's got to be maybe one of the best restaurants in the world that serves food on paper plates, is a place called Conejitos. And this place is an institution on Milwaukee's South Side. I mean, to this day, I think you can get 4 steak tacos for $6. Cheap, strong pitchers of margarita, amazing chicken mole for like, it's either like $7.50 or $8, depending on white or dark meats. And this place has incredible food, a great atmosphere, like a jukebox. Like it's one of my favorite restaurants in the world. And like you there's nothing on the menu that is over like $8. Just fantastic. So like I'll eat just about any sort of food, Jorge. My wife isn't that big into Asian food. My kids won't eat Indian food, but like Mexican food is the one thing that our family is united on. So I'm glad for that. Like, we are always seeking out new taco places, and it's. I was a little spoiled in Milwaukee compared to the suburbs of Chicago, but we're finding our way, and hopefully there will be some more places opening up soon once we're out of the pandemic.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. By the way, do you know what conejitos means in English?
No.
Little rabbit. The little rabbits.
Little rabbits. It's Conejito's place, so it's that's really cool. Yeah, this if you're ever in Milwaukee, you've got to look this place up for sure. I mean, it's one of a kind.
Now I got to do a food tour. So I love it. Love it. Oh, Pat, Patricio, if you'll indulge me to give you a little Latin flavor for a second. This was such a pleasure. Un gran placer. Let's close up shop and please let everybody know where they can find your great work.
Oh, sure, Jorge. I've had a blast talking to you, and thank you so much for having me on the show. People can find me on Twitter at Fitz_FF. They can look for my podcast, Fitz on Fantasy. And, my rankings are at both thefootballgirl.com and footballguys.com.
Oh, outstanding. And, everybody, this guy's as nice as he comes across in his podcast. I can't recommend. Please subscribe to that podcast. It's you get a wealth of information, and it's always fun. And for us, eso es todo for our show. Thanks again to Anchor for being our hosting network and making sure we get out there to Apple, Google, Spotify. Please give us a subscribe and hopefully leave us a review. Also, find our faces on YouTube. So you give us a subscribe there, por favor. We'd really appreciate it. And my original content, you can find it at familiaffb.com, and you can find me at Jorge Martin 17, as well as our Familia FFB on Twitter and Instagram. Otra vez, Pat, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And everybody, get ready for your drafts. I hope you were paying attention and taking notes, because there was some major knowledge dropped here. And let's remember, todos somos familia.